Welcome back. We're ending on the weirdest part: obsession, burnout, and what success actually costs. And then there is that whole question of whether winning makes you calmer or just hungrier. Also, the man can turn chocolate into a military operation. That is not normal human behavior, by the way. It is absolutely not, but it is also why it works. That detail about checking broken bars in Walmart was insane. Hidden GoPros in supermarkets is a sentence nobody should ever say casually. And he said it like he was talking about buying milk. But that is the point, right? He genuinely cannot let details slide. He has the same relationship to chocolate that most founders should have to their core product. Most founders just want the launch photo and the clap on stage. And then they disappear the second the boxes arrive broken. Exactly, he is in the warehouse, on the shelf, in the aisle, in the data. That is the obsessive founder gene in its purest form. What I found interesting is he does not frame it as sacrifice first. He frames it as fun, which is way more dangerous. Yeah, because then it is not discipline, it is identity. That is how people end up saying, "I am the work," and then collapsing. But he also admitted there is a mental health cost. The isolation, the criticism, the constant pressure, all of that is real. And with him, the crazy part is he is still sprinting anyway. Do you think that is ambition or just survival mode that never switched off? Probably both, which is the least comforting answer. The funniest thing is he is genuinely offended by bad packaging. Like a box falling over is a personal insult to his soul. But that is what made the bigger point land: standards compound. If you tolerate tiny failure, you eventually tolerate big failure. And most businesses are built on tiny, tolerated failure. Exactly, good enough becomes the culture. He is basically trying to weaponize discomfort against mediocrity. That sounds like a villain line, but I mean it respectfully. No, but seriously, that is what top performers do. They notice what everybody else stops noticing. And that includes the little things on a shelf, on a thumbnail, in a retention curve. Which is why he probably can ruin a holiday by looking at analytics. Imagine him at dinner checking CTR instead of enjoying dessert. That said, he is not pretending this is healthy. He almost sounds like he is warning people not to romanticize it. Because if your obsession is not paired with self-awareness, it eats you. And he actually seems to know that. The mother conversation was the emotional center for me, honestly. Same, because it explained so much without him needing to over-explain. The whole story of her working multiple jobs, losing everything, and still backing him. And him basically saying, "Mom, please stop stressing, I will handle the vitamins." That is such an adult-child reversal. But it is also sweet because now he is the one building stability. The part where he said he would not whisper anything to his younger self was huge. Yeah, that is the most mature answer he could have given. He basically said the confusion was necessary. Which is annoying because people always want a neat inspirational quote. Instead, he gave us, "I would not interfere with my own becoming." That hits harder than a motivational speech. And then the sound body versus sound mind question was so revealing. He picked mind instantly, which tells you exactly what he values. A functioning brain over a functioning bicep, shocker. I mean, from him, it is not even a contest. What stood out to me most is how he treats scale as a responsibility, not a trophy. Beast Games was not just expensive, it was structurally ridiculous. 1,000 towers, custom software, millions in storage, custom Adobe changes. That infrastructure story sounded like someone trying to film the moon landing. And somehow he says it like, "Yeah, we just had a busy week." But that is why the show felt different from normal reality TV. He did not want producers scripting people into characters. He wanted the raw footage, the weird alliances, the real pressure. Which is expensive, messy, and brutally inefficient. Basically his favorite kind of project. And he still said he lost tens of millions on it. That part mattered, because he was not bluffing about caring more than money. He wanted the first season to be undeniable. And now it is opening doors for other creators, too. That might be the biggest hidden impact of the whole thing. Not just the show doing well, but creators being taken seriously by platforms. The ecosystem got a free confidence injection. Which is a very funny way to describe hundreds of millions of dollars. And then there is the weird emotional come down after the finish line. That was probably the most human thing he said. Every Thursday, the internet reacts, and then suddenly, the ritual is gone. That is a real loss, even when you have won. People think the biggest problem is failure, but sometimes it is completion. When the thing that drives you pauses, you have to meet yourself again. Which sounds horrifying if your entire life is momentum. He dodged the future question pretty carefully, but not in a fake way. He just does not want to pretend he knows what life will look like. And honestly, that honesty was refreshing. Because the easy answer would have been bigger numbers, more empire. He basically said, maybe kids, maybe more businesses, maybe all chaos. That felt more real than a polished 5-year plan. And the last thing I want to say is this dude understands leverage at every level. Attention, product quality, storytelling, infrastructure, culture, all of it. He is not just making content, he is building systems. Which is why copying his surface behavior is useless. You can mimic the pace and still miss the brain. The real lesson is that obsession without systems is chaos. And systems without obsession are dead. That is annoyingly perfect, and I hate how clean that sounds. Episode 3, and honestly, the whole series ends there for me. A wild brain, brutal standards, real cost, and somehow still joy. That is the whole movie. And the bigger takeaway is not to worship it, but to learn from it carefully. That feels like the right note to leave on. Thanks for staying with us through the whole thing. Welcome back. This is the final stretch, and we are in the deep end now. This episode is really about obsession, the price of winning, and what happens after the win. And honestly, the fact that he makes chocolate sound like warfare is insane. Bro is scanning shelves like he is tracking a satellite launch. That is what got me, though, because it is not fake intensity. He really cares about the thing in front of him at a ridiculous level. But that is where I get stuck. Because is that healthy or just effective? It is both, and that is the annoying answer. Yeah, of course, the truth is inconvenient. What I respected is he does not pretend the cost is imaginary. He said the loneliness, the criticism, the pressure, all of it is real. And yet he still talks like somebody who would choose the same path again. Which is a very alarming sentence if you say it slowly. It sounds like a warning label and a love letter at the same time. The childhood stuff makes the whole thing heavier, too. Being sick, feeling out of place, family bankruptcy, all of that matters. Because then YouTube is not just a career, it is almost escape and duty. And that changes how you judge the obsession, right? You are not looking at random hustle. You are looking at survival plus ambition. Survival plus ambition is such a cursed combo. It explains why he can talk about a chocolate bar like it insulted his family. But should every founder be like that? No, because most people would burn the company and their brain. Yet the other side is most people also never build anything remarkable. That tension is the whole episode, really. He keeps returning to first principles, which is basically his religion. His religion has a Walmart aisle and a retention chart. And a broken chocolate bar is basically a spiritual failure. But that detail obsession is why he catches things everyone else misses. The package engineer part was actually wild to me. He had a product problem, saw the fallout in stores, and went straight into the field. Most people would just blame distribution and move on. He blamed physics, packaging, and probably the universe. Then hired people to go rescue broken bars like they were hostages. That hidden GoPro story is still crazy to me. It is not glamorous, but it is real operator behavior. The strange thing is how that same brain runs both content and product. He is obsessive about retention, and obsessive about shelf placement. Same guy, same intensity, different battlefield. But do you think that makes him unusually resilient? Or just unusually unable to switch off? Probably both, and that is where the danger lives. The mental health cost is not a side note here, it is part of the engine. I think that is why he sounded sad after Beast Games ended. Not because he lost, but because the mission paused. That post-achievement emptiness is so common and nobody talks about it enough. Gold medal depression, but for a man with 50 Guinness records. That sounds ridiculous until you realize meaning is addictive. He needs the next mountain because climbing is the identity. And that is why Season 2 matters to him beyond money. Speaking of money, the economics of Beast Games were absurd. Tens of millions out of pocket is not a creative decision, that is a war crime. Amazon gave him a platform, and he gave them a loss leader with fireworks. But that is also why people started taking creators seriously as studio builders. He changed the bargaining power for everyone behind him. That part is actually bigger than the spectacle. Because once one creator proves the model, the gatekeepers lose their excuse. The gatekeepers hate nothing more than a functioning spreadsheet, especially when the spreadsheet has 100 million views attached to it. The other huge thread is the mother story. That relationship is doing a lot of emotional work in the whole conversation. Because the ambition is not just ego, it is gratitude and repair. He kept circling back to what she sacrificed and what she believed before everyone else did. And the fact that she thought a 40K brand deal was rich tells you everything. That family timeline is basically poverty to chaos to power. But it never gets cynical, which is the surprising part. He is hard on himself, but not bitter about where he came from. That is probably why the whole thing feels human instead of performative. Still, I do wonder if there is a version of success where he sleeps more. No chance he would probably audit the sleep schedule. He would turn REM into a KPI. What I like is that he does not romanticize balance when he does not have it. He basically says, I am building now, maybe I balance later. Which is honest, if a little terrifying. And I think honesty is the point of this whole series. Not to make obsession look cool, but to understand what it costs. And also why some people are willing to pay it anyway. Because apparently a normal life would have been too boring for him. Or maybe it was never available in the first place. That is the part people miss when they judge these stories too fast. They hear confidence and miss the years of alienation underneath it. They hear wealth and miss the fear that built the discipline. Exactly, and that is why this episode lands so hard. Also because he can make a charity chocolate bar sound like a military operation. Which, to be fair, maybe it needs to be. The weirdest thing is that the jokes never hide the seriousness. He is funny, but the standards are brutal. And that combination is what makes the whole thing dangerous and impressive. I think that is our final takeaway, honestly. If you want the scale, you have to respect the sacrifice. But you do not have to copy the sacrifice to learn from the scale. That feels like the healthiest way to end this series. We got the obsession, the fallout, the systems, and the weirdly tender family core. And somehow, a Walmart became part of the emotional arc. Honestly, that is modern greatness now. Thanks for staying with us through the whole thing. We will see you in the next one. Welcome back, because this one gets into the weirdest part of success, the obsession, the cost, and the family underneath it. And yeah, we end on the uncomfortable question of what winning actually takes from you. Bro, the guy really said he would rather keep building than take $1 billion. That is such a sick answer until you remember he means it. Most people say that like a quote, he says it like a diagnosis. Like, money is nice, but have you considered being impossible to stop? That is basically his personality in one sentence. What got me was how he treats a chocolate bar like a mission-critical system. Hidden cameras in Walmart for broken bars is insane. Bro was running a product quality investigation like it was a spy movie. But that is the point. He does not separate product from obsession. He is not saying, I have a side business. He is saying, I need this to be perfect. And most founders would have stopped at good enough on day 3. Most founders would have stopped at the box is not actively exploding. He is out here measuring shelf angles like a NASA engineer. That is actually the wild part, though, because it is not vanity. It is him believing the tiny details decide whether the whole thing wins or fails. And honestly, he might be right more often than people want to admit. That is what separates cool brand from real business. The funniest part is he is doing this while running this monstrous media machine. A giant YouTube channel, a streaming show, philanthropy, and then Walmart recon missions. That is not a schedule, that is a hostage situation. And somehow he is still like, I should probably learn more about the shelving. That is where the conversation gets bigger than chocolate. He is basically arguing that real leadership means knowing every layer of the machine. Which sounds amazing until you realize how exhausting that is. Because if you care about everything, you never really get to rest. But that is also why people trust the work. He is not outsourcing the soul of the thing. Then Beast Games comes in like this absurd final boss of production. 50+ Guinness records, massive sets, thousands of towers, cameras everywhere. The production itself sounds like a war crime against spreadsheets. And yet somehow the damage was intentional. What I loved is that he kept explaining why that scale matters narratively. If you want real reactions, you cannot fake the environment too much. Story producers telling people what to say is basically cheating with a blazer on. Cheating with a blazer on is nasty work, man. He wanted the chaos to be real, and that is why it took so much infrastructure. The invisible part was the actual monster: storage, editing, servers, cables, all of it. And he is just casually saying a single editor would need crazy hard drives. That is when you know this is not influencer content anymore. It is a company building a new kind of television from scratch. And the financial risk is the part people keep underestimating. He literally said he lost tens of millions of dollars on it. Imagine your passion project casually deleting a mansion from your net worth. But that is why the result feels different. He was not optimizing for a quick return, he was optimizing for proof. Proof to Amazon, proof to the industry, proof to creators watching him. And apparently it worked because now everybody wants in. 2 creators already signed deals off the back-end success. That is huge. This is where scale turns into leverage for an entire class of people. That part actually matters more than the headline numbers, honestly. Because he is not just making one show successful. He is changing what platforms think creators can carry. But he also admitted the emotional side is weird. Finishing something that big can feel like losing your compass. That gold medal depression thing is so real. People think success ends the hunger, but sometimes it just removes structure. Suddenly the giant life project is over, and now you are just a human again. Which, for some people, is the scariest plot twist imaginable. And then he swings straight into family, which honestly hit the hardest. The photos with his mom were such a clean, emotional gut punch. You can see the timeline of struggle and relief just in her face. He keeps saying he would not change the past because the struggle made the conviction. That is one of those answers that sounds harsh until you understand it. He is not romanticizing pain, he is saying it built the lens he uses now. And his mom becomes the emotional anchor that keeps the whole machine human. I loved that he was protective of her now in a practical way. Not just, I love you, but you need to be healthy for the future. Bro is managing his mom like a long-term operations plan. Family, but with quarterly wellness checks. That sounds funny until you remember he is actually serious. And maybe that is the real thesis of the whole conversation. The obsession only works because there is something deeply personal underneath it. He is trying to build, prove, protect, and outlast at the same time. That is a lot for one person to carry. Which makes the weird confidence more understandable, not less. He is not fearless, he is just extremely committed. And that is probably the more honest definition of greatness. Or at least the less marketable one. Greatness sounds nicer than I am too stubborn to quit. The best part for me is that he does not hide the cost. He admits the criticism, the loneliness, the pressure, the failures. And that honesty makes the success feel earned instead of decorative. Which is probably why people keep watching him. Because underneath the spectacle, there is still a person doing the work. A person with flaws, obsession, discipline, and a weird amount of nerve. Which is basically the startup founder fantasy if it got hit by lightning. I also think this series ended on the right note for us. Not copy him, but understand what conviction actually costs. That is the lesson, really. And maybe also, inspect your packaging before your bars become glass. That is definitely one of the lessons. If there is a final takeaway, it is that scale is built in the invisible places. The shelf, the edit, the server room, the family, the routine, the standards. And the person who keeps showing up after everyone else gets tired. So that is the end of the road for this one, and it was a wild ride. We got the obsession, the fallout, and the strange tenderness inside the machine. And somehow a Walmart ended up with character development. That place really did steal the show for a minute. Thanks for riding through the whole series with us. We will see you in the next one. Welcome back. This final one is about obsession, sacrifice, and the weird price of winning. It is also about what happens when success still does not let you relax. The wild part is how small the obsession looks from the outside. Like it is just a chocolate bar until you are in 30 Walmarts at midnight. Most people would call that a hobby and go home. He hears one broken bar and suddenly there is a whole investigation. Hidden cameras in Walmart bags is such a deranged sentence. And yet that is exactly why the product gets better. That is the uncomfortable truth, though. The standards are not just high, they are everywhere. Shelf, box, storage, breakpoints, all of it matters. Most founders are not even thinking about the box lip. They are thinking about a logo and a motivational post. He is thinking about why the whole shelf collapses forward. That is the difference between selling a thing and building a system. And he does not seem to separate those at all. It is almost like the product becomes a moral issue. If a kid gets a broken bar, he feels responsible, which is why he is paying people to clean up broken bars across America. That is not scale, that is personal vengeance with spreadsheets. But then he turns that into learning instead of ego. That part is actually rare, because most people would defend the bad process forever. They would rather be right than correct. He is the opposite. He would rather be annoyed than average. And he carries that same energy into the main channel too. The experimentation only works if failure is allowed to be expensive. That is such a crazy sentence. Failure has to be expensive. But if it is not, nothing new ever gets made. He basically treats mistakes like data, not betrayal, which is probably healthier than yelling at people for missing once. Also way scarier in a good way. Like imagine getting calmly destroyed by a chart. The weird beauty is that he creates room for people to try things. But he also expects them to learn fast. No nostalgia for bad decisions, no worship of the old way. Just iterate, fix it, move on. That rhythm is basically his whole life. Even with the childhood stuff, the family stuff, the loneliness, all of it. The success did not erase the cost, it just gave it a larger stage. And that is the part people romanticize too easily. They see the empire and skip the anxiety. They skip the feeling of being out of place for years. They skip the idea that winning can still feel lonely. The mom part hit me hardest, honestly, because it was never just business for him. It was always tied to proving something to the people who held it together. And to be fair, his mom sounds like a superhero with a military schedule. She probably heard him say YouTube and thought the kid had lost it. Straight zeros and a camera is not exactly a comforting life plan. But that tension is what gives the whole thing emotional weight. Because the work was never just for applause. It was survival first, then identity, then scale. And now the scale has become its own kind of pressure. The Beast Games part showed that perfectly. 100+ people editing, server rooms, custom software, all of it. Basically a small country built for a competition show. And he still talks about it like it is unfinished business. I love that he called the sadness playful, not tragic. It sounded like someone grieving momentum, not meaning, which is a very different thing. Most people hear that and think burnout, but he sounds more like a machine that needs a new target. A very expensive, very caffeinated machine. Sponsored by raw obsession and probably no sleep. And yet there is tenderness in it too. Like the way he talks about his mom, the team, even the failures. He is brutal on process and surprisingly gentle on people. That is probably why people follow him so hard. Also because he will drive across a state line for a chocolate bar. That helps, yes. The bigger point is that obsession is not always vanity. Sometimes it is just refusal to accept mediocrity. And that refusal can build something huge. It can also cost you a lot. That is the trade, and he knows it. Anyway, that is the final lap of this one. We got the obsession, the infrastructure, the family, and the emotional bill. And somehow a Walmart became a recurring character, which feels deeply correct for this story. Thanks for staying with us through all 3 episodes. We will catch you in the next one.